guys, welcome to our first session for week 4. I hope everyone's doing great today. We are in our last week. We are almost there, guys, and still quite a few of you behind. We need to get caught up this week. If you need my help, you just need to let me know. I will make sure that I am available when you are available. So just reach out to me, let me know when you can meet with me, and we will make it happen. Okay, today we're going to go over the stuff you need to know for week 4. My email address, mistyporch@independence.edu, or you can reply to any of the numerous emails that I've sent you. You can also call or text message me at 817-909-5597. Today we're going to go over the week 4 assignment, guys. We're going to talk about everything that you need to know about this week. The first worksheet is over chapter 7. There are 2 worksheets this week, chapter 7 and chapter 8. They're not very long, so don't panic. There is some new stuff that you need to know, though. The first thing you're going to come across is creating a view. In SQL, a view is a virtual table. Basically, you're creating a temporary table that will pull in information from multiple tables, or just one table into a new table based on a certain criteria usually. It contains rows and columns just like a real table. It's just not permanent. It's just like a temporary table. You are going to use the where. You can use where. You can use join statements if you need to pull in information from 2 different tables. Joins are what you were doing last week when you were pulling information from 2 or 3 different tables into one display. This view, the code syntax is pretty easy. You just do a create view and you give it the view name, whatever you want to call that table, and it follows the word as. The keyword as has to be at the end. And then you do your select statement, the columns that you want to display, from which table you want to pull that information from, and then your condition. Question number 1 says, create a view named main trips. It consists of the trip ID, trip name, start location, distance, maximum group size, type, and season. And for each trip location that's in main. So your code would look like this example here. Create view, mountain trip as, select, trip ID, trip name, start location, distance, max group size, type, season. From trip, where state equals ME. And it's going to create a table that contains just that information. And it's only temporary. Now you're going to be using that where clause. And we've gone over this and you have used it at this point multiple times. The where clause doesn't change. It's the same in that view as it is in create view as it is when you just do it in a select statement. It follows the from statement and you just list your conditions. Sorry, guys. Now, question number 2 asks you to use that where statement on the temporary view table you created, the main trips table. And so you have to change your where clause to answer the filter that it's asking you for in question 2. Well, actually, it's 1A. No, 2B. 1B. I'm sorry. It's 1B. And it asks you to display things for biking. So in that from statement, you're going to use your temporary view name, which was mountain trip. Actually, I think that should say main trip. It should say main trip. That's a typo, guys. It should say main trip. So on 2B, you would say from, and you would give that temporary view, that main trips. And where? Type equals biking. while we're in here, let's escape this and fix it real quick. This should say main. There we go. Now, 1C is a little confusing. The question says, write and execute the query that the DBMS actually execute. What's this mean? What that is asking you to do is you are going to combine the where clause from 1A and 1B and 1C from the original table you're getting that information from. Well, the main trip table was created using the trip table, right? So this time, you're going to write your query using the trip table to pull that same information. So you're going to say select trip ID, trip name, distance from the trip table where the state equals ME, which is main, and the type equals biking, because you had to filter that list twice. And in this clause, you're just going to show the query that would pull all of that information from the original table. That's what it's asking you to do. It's kind of worded a little funny, I think, but that is what it means. Now, these are some key terms. Your next question, which is 1D. Whew. Hold on a second, because I gotta sneeze. Maybe not. Okay. Question 1D says, does updating the database through this view create any problems? If so, what are they? If not, why not? You've got to answer that question. These are the things you need to know about updating in views. Can it be done? In some circumstances, yes. If it contains one table and a primary key, then yes, it can be updated. That's our trip table, right? It contains one table and it has the primary ID, trip ID in it. So yes, we could update it using that view table. Because the view is a row and column subset that contains the primary key, you can update the database using this view. When adding a row via this view, columns not in the view would need to be null, meaning it would need to be empty. So you couldn't update all the information, is basically what that's saying. You could update whatever information was in that view. But if you needed to update information that's not in that view table, you would have to update the trip table itself and not that view. So what about a table that contains more than one table and more than one primary key? Well, the answer is no. You cannot use the view to do your updating because the view involves a join of something other than the primary keys. You cannot update the database via view. So what about if it contains math or statistic type information, meaning you're doing some sort of calculation in the SQL when you created that view? Well, because the view involves statistics, you cannot update the data via this view. You would have to go to the original tables or tables that you pulled that information from to do any updating. Keywords to remember: list, and usually it's followed by a name, a comma, and so forth. Basically, the question is asking you, this is what I want you to display. Well, anything following the word list in the question or columns that would appear after the select statement, those are things that would appear after the select statement. So anything after that word list until you get to the end of that sentence is going to come after the select statement. When you read a question that says write or execute the command, This is just another way of saying create a query. That's all that is, create a query. So that's either create view, select, insert, alter, drop. Those are all commands. They're all queries. Now, 2A and 2B are a repeat of the create view and your where clause. So we're not going to go through those again because we just did. You're just going to be repeating what you did for 1A and 1B. Just based on the criteria for each one of those questions. 2C, on the other hand, says, write and execute the query that the DBMS actually execute. Well, it's the same thing as in 1C. You're just going to combine what you did in 2A and 2B into 2C. So, in 2A, it tells you to create a view. And it says to name that review reservation customer. Well, this time you're going to be pulling from the original databases, which were, there was 2 in that instance. You are going to be pulling from the reservation and the customer. So you're going to list your columns: reservation ID, trip date, last name. And from the reservation, customers. Where the reservation.customer underscore number equals the customer underscore number. Remember, you're creating a join. So you have to identify where that join is in that where clause. And the trip date of 2016-09-11. And it will pull it all up for you. And if you're saying, wait, question 1 didn't have multiple tables. You're right, it didn't. But it's the same thing as the select table when you're doing multiple tables. The only difference is after from, you're going to add a comma and add the second table there. And you're going to have to add that where clause to identify how they connect. So you would be using that exact same thing in this example. You would say where reservation.customer number equals customer.customer number. Question 3A is about creating a view and doing math in that new table. You do that by creating your view name as, the columns you want to list in that view, from which table you're getting that information from, in your condition for your where clause. The example of that would be to say, create view trip inventory as, so we're going to know we are creating a new table called trip inventory. And we're going to select, we're going to display the column state, and then we're going to do some math. We're going to count, which is a function, and in parentheses, the asterisk, and we're going to name that new column units. So we're going to say as units from the trip table. And you're going to group by state. You're going to group by state and order by state. That sounds a little confusing, doesn't it? I thought this would be a great example for us to just look at. So I'm going to pull my workbench up. I've got Colonial Adventures highlighted. So we say create view, trip inventory as select state, comma, count, asterisk, parentheses, as units from trip and group by state and order by state. And we run this. Well, we see it's run. And we created it. So how do we see it? Select from trip underscore inventory. Oops. There we go. Trip inventory S. Let me pull that information. Create view, state, count. I got that. State count, yes, as units. From trip, group by, yes, yes, yes. Oh, well, let's see. There it is. It just didn't like my extra code up there. Okay, here it is. So that's our new view table right there. That's all the information. With that simple create statement. And then you move into 3C. And it wants you to write and execute the query that the DBM actually executes. Well, we know that we got all of that information from the trip table. And that's where we created that view from, was the trip table. So essentially, you're doing the exact same thing that you've done for every other question that you've had to do for that database. Now, we skipped over to 3B because it's just a simple where clause. You guys know how to do those. If you don't, if you don't remember or you're having trouble with that, you can look back at the PDF I sent you or rewind to the where slide where I showed them to you again. Your syntax is simple. You still have to do the math. So you're going to do a select column name, count asterisk as, in your new column name, which would be select state, count asterisk as units. And then from the trip table, that's the original table, you want to group it by state. And you want to say having count with that asterisk, in this case, greater than 10. In order by state. Well, let's see what we would get if we did this. Select state, comma, count, asterisk as units from trip, and group by state, having count on your asterisk, let's see, greater than 10, and order by state. And it's going to give us 2, Maine and New Hampshire. So let's talk about granting access. That is what the rest of your worksheet on Chapter 7 is all about. It's all about granting access. And you'll do a lot of this when you are building databases for companies that are going to be pulling business information and things like that off of. Because they're only going to want certain people to be able to access certain amount of those certain amounts of data. So, for example, user Rodriguez must be able to retrieve data from the trip table. Complete the following SQL commands. Excuse me again, guys. Now, I want you to remember that this part, section 4, actually it goes down, let's see, section 4, section 5, section 6 of the worksheet for chapter 7 tells you to complete, but do not execute. That means you're not going to run the command. You're just going to type it out. So in this case, if we were answering this question, user Rodriguez must be able to retrieve data from the trip table. It would be a simple statement. Grant select on the table name. In this case, it's the trip table. 2 in the user's name. Rodriguez. So, you're going to type it out just like that. And then you're not going to hit that lightning bolt, guys. Do not hit that lightning bolt. You're just going to grab your snipping tool and just take a screenshot. Copy it, paste it in your Word document. That's all you have to do. And then you're just going to move on to the next one. And the next one talks about granting access with edit privileges. You want to allow this user to be able to edit the information in the table. For example, users Andrew and Zimmerman must be able to change the price of a trip. So you need to grant them access to do that. In this case, you're going to allow them to update a table. So you're going to say grant, update, the column name, which in this case would be price, on the table name, which is going to be the trip table, and then the username, which is Andrews and Zimmerman. So you would say grant update, and in parentheses, price on reservation to Andrews, comma, Zimmer. And that's it. Type it out, take a screenshot of it. Do not execute this statement. And the next question talks about granting everyone access to columns in a table, a specific table. For example, all users must be able to retrieve the trip name, start location, distance, and type for every trip. So basically what we're doing here is we're going to do an open-ended grant access. And you do that by saying grant select, and then you list your column names inside the parentheses. On the table name. And then you say to public. It's that simple. Once again, you're going to type it in, screenshot it, but do not execute it. So do not hit that lightning bolt. And then we have the granting access to internet and delete, granting access to insert and delete data. So we need to give them access to insert a row of data or to also delete it. Example, user Golden must be able to add and delete guides. So what we would do is say, okay, grant insert on the table name, which is guides, and then to the person, the user in this case, which is Golden. So we would say grant insert on guide to Golden, semicolon. Don't forget that semicolon. On the next line, you would say grant delete on guide to Golden. Now you've given him access to insert, and you've also given him access to delete. Any questions? And then you're going to start having to grant access for specific things. Your index rights. For example, user Andrews must be able to create an index for the trip table. Complete the following SQL. Well, the syntax is pretty simple and it follows along with all the other grants. You're simply going to say grant index on the table name, in this case, which is trip, to the user, which is Andrews. Very simple statement. My cold is almost gone. I've gone to that stage where my throat is really dry. And so the more talking I do, the more coughing I do. Sorry, guys. Okay, and then you're going to have to grant alter rights, which will allow them to change the structure and that sort of thing. So if you have a question that said user Andrews and Golden must be able to change the structure of the customer table, complete the following SQL command. It's a very simple statement. Grant alter on. Same thing we've been following. We're just changing that one word. Grant alter on. And then, of course, the table name, in this case, is the customer table. And then to the user or users. So Andrews, comma, Golden. Screenshot it. Don't hit that lightning bolt. And then if you need to grant all user rights, for example, to the database, you are granting all user rights to the entire database. User Golden must have privileges of the trip guide and trip guides tables. So you need to create the statement. Unfortunately, you can't do it all in one statement. So you have to do it in 3 separate statements. Don't forget your semicolons. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Now, you aren't going to be running this one either. You're just going to take a screenshot of your text. But just remember, make sure you have those semicolons on the end. And it's basically the same thing. We're changing that one word. Grant something on. In this case, we're granting all. So we're going to say grant all on trip to in the user, Golden. Semicolon. On the next line, we would say grant all on, the next table it tells us is the guide table. So we'd say guide to Golden. He's the user. And then that semicolon, and on the next slide, we would do our last table. Grant all on trip guides to Golden. And then run it. But, well, you would run it if this was a real database. You are not granting privileges, because what's going to happen is you run all of these, and it's not going to allow you to manipulate the database anymore because you're not a user. and you can't make yourself a user in my workbench without some other coding, and we're not going to make you go through all of that. So you're just pretending. So remember not to hit your lightning bolt. And then finally you get to revoking all user rights. You would use something like this if your customer called you, 6 months later and said, we had to let one of our employees go. He had access to some confidential information. We want to make sure that he can't access that data any longer. Well, you could simply pull up that database and do a simple command that says revoke all privileges from, and then username. You don't even have to specify a table or column or anything, because you're just revoking it all. That way you can ensure your customer that that user is not going to be able to access this data any longer using his username. Now then, chapter 7, questions 6A through C and question 7 also tell you to complete but do not execute. So again, you're just going to type, take the screenshot, but not hit that lightning bolt. So let's talk about creating an actual index. For example, if you had a scenario where it asks you to create an index, you would do it something like this. Let's say, for example, it said create an index named trip index 1 on the trip name column in the trip table. So you would say, it's kind of like creating a table, guys. Instead, you're just saying create index. And whatever you want to call that index on whichever table you want that to apply to. And then in parentheses after the table name is where you list the columns you want to index. For example, you could say, looking at our scenario up there, you could say create index, trip index 1 on trip. And the column we're actually indexing is called trip underscore name. It's just a very simple statement. Remember, type it, take a screenshot of it, but do not hit that lightning bolt. Now, 6A through C and number 7 are all about creating indexes. It's just one after another. Some of them may ask you to index 2 columns. You just separate them between the parentheses where it says trip name. Maybe it wanted the trip name and distance indexed. You would just say trip name, comma, distance in between those parentheses. And then it tells you, it wants you to delete an index. Deleting an index is the same as deleting a table. You're just going to use that drop. So you're going to say drop index and the index name. So if you completed an index, and let's say you called it book index 3, you would simply say drop, oh, I'm sorry, not book, you named it trip index 3. You would say drop index trip underscore index 3, the name of that actual index, and you would just drop it. Again, you're just taking a screenshot and not executing that code, so don't hit the lightning bolt. Now is when you're going to start actually executing. At number 8, you start executing code again. And when you get to number 8, it's going to ask you to list table information, columns, and attributes. Select every column, i.e. column name, in the guide table and its associated data type. Well, this is a pretty simple statement, and it's kind of like the index statement, except for you are going to do something this simple. And I want you guys to see how this actually works. So I'm going to type it out as I talk about it. You're going to say, okay, select, and we want to select every single column name, but we don't know what those column names are. So we're going to say select column underscore name, comma, and the data underscore type, which are the attributes. Whether it's a character, a bar character, or an integer, or a decimal, it's going to tell us that. And we're going to say from, well, we're not giving it a table name here because we want to display it from the database itself. So we're going to say from information underscore schema dot columns where table underscore name equals guide, and then run it. It's almost like doing a describe statement, except for it doesn't give you all that additional information. This is just a shorter form. As you notice, shorter form gives you a shorter view, requires more code. But in some instances, this might be something that you guys need to know. A lot of databases will have access. A lot of displays on websites have access to this large database, but they only want to show a very specific amount of information. Or you have been asked for the customer to supply a cheat sheet for employees that actually input data so that they can remember if it's supposed to be a date, if it's supposed to be a number, etc. This is the easiest way to give them that information because you can export this. Once you've ran this display, you can actually export it. In MySQL, you can just hit the export and you can save it as a CVS, an HTML. Usually I save mine as CSVs and then I open it in Excel and either send them the Excel file or I just save it as a PDF and send it to them that way. This is the simplest way to do that because your customers' employees aren't going to understand all of those other columns that you get when you simply do describe. They need the simple stuff. And then it asks you to list column information. Let's say, for instance, you needed to list every table that contains a column with the same name. In this case, you want to list every table that contains a column that is named trip ID. Same basic format. You're going to say select, instead of column name, this time you're going to say table name. And you're going to say from information schema dot columns, columns, and you're going to say where column, that comma is just in my way today, where column name equals trip underscore ID, like that. And we run it, and look what we get. We can see all those column names. We can see every column that's repeated. Now you see it lists reservations several times. It lists trips several times. It lists guides several times. If you only wanted a single list with no repeats, because if you're trying to look and see what columns have been repeated so you can check your joins and things like that, having them repeated makes it a little harder to check them off your list. unless you order them. You could do this several ways. You could simply group by trip ID. Oh, it won't let you. Oh no. So let's group by table underscore name. That's really what it was. Yes. So you get reservation, trip guides. Those three tables we know are connected some way because they have repeating columns. Or you could do order by. That way, if they're repeated one after another and they're not kind of spread around everywhere. That's the easiest way to do it. And you say, okay, reservations and reservation both have a column named trip ID. And the trip table has a trip ID, and the trip guides has a trip ID. So all three of these two tables are connected in some way. They all have a relationship. In this case, a many-to-many relationship. And then it asks you to list column information for specific columns. This is where you have to get really specific. For example, list the table name, column name, and data type for the columns named trip ID and trip name. Order the results by table name within column name. This is column number. That is, column name is the major sort key, and table name is the minor sort key. So you would be doing something like, let's see, select and we're going to use that broad table name, comma, and the column name, comma, and data type from information schema dot columns where column name equals trip underscore ID, or column name equals, what's the next one? Trip name, or column name equals type, and then we're going to order by column name, comma, table name, and run it. And there it is. Now we've listed a whole lot of stuff there, but you can see it's all grouped together the way it's supposed to be. So we've got trip ID. All of the tables that have a trip ID are the guides table, the trip table, the reservation table. All of them that have a trip name column, well, that's the trip table. And all of them that show a type, well, you get quite a few different things. And yours may not show all of these because some of this is stuff that was done to this database before in another class. So you probably won't have all these functions and metrics and things like that. You may come up with some metrics because you did the count, but you won't have some of this other stuff, and that's okay. Just show what you have. Like your threads, you will probably have your threads. You'll have the trip type, because we know the trip has a type column. You will probably have a matrix. You will probably have the foreign key. You probably won't have an index. And you probably won't have a function. The rest of it you'll probably have. Just take the screenshot of what you have. That's perfectly fine. Now then, that's the end of chapter 7. I told you it wasn't very long. It's not going to take you very long to complete that. It's more typing than anything else. So, chapter 8 is even shorter. There's only like 5 questions on chapter 8. The first one talks about how to change the look of what's held inside of a column, like taking something that is sentence casing and making it all lowercase or making it all uppercase. And it's very simple. It's using the lower and upper keywords. So in this case, we want to make the first name lowercase and the last name, let's the guy name. The first name should appear lowercase and the last name should appear uppercase. So it's very simple. We're going to say select, and then we're going to start listing our columns. So it tells us to select the guide number. So we're going to say guide underscore number, comma, in the first name, which we know needs to be lowercase. So we're just going to say lower, and inside those parentheses is where you're going to put the column name. So we're going to say first underscore name, comma, then we're going to say upper, and inside those parentheses, we're going to say last underscore name from guide. And run it, and you can see it lists our guide numbers, and it lists our first name in lowercase and our last names in uppercase. And before that, they were just sentence casing. The first letter was only the capital letter. Everything else was lowercase. You can also use those lower and upper keywords when you need to filter something into lower or upper. So, as an example, list the trip ID and trip name for all trips that start in Bar Harbor. Your query should ignore the case of how Bar Harbor is entered in the query. For example, a trip with the start location of Bar Harbor should be included, as should trips who start with the location Bar Harbor, or so on, no matter how they're spelled. So you could do that either lower or you could do them all in upper. It really doesn't matter, but it's the same query. So you're going to say select, and then your columns is telling you to list the trip ID and the trip name. And from the trip table, of course, and we're going to say where, and I'm going to say upper. Start underscore location equals Bar Harbor. And run it. Can we get 3? 4. 4. We get 4. All of these start in Bar Harbor. It doesn't matter how you type it. You can say Bar Harbor like that, or I can make it all caps. Bar Harbor. And run it again. It's still going to give me those same 4 results. Because we've used that nice keyword there. It's changing everything anyway. Okay, and then you get into something a little bit complicated in chapter 8. It's asking you to add a certain number of months to the hire date to figure out when an employee should have a review. Now, the hint that is on that worksheet is incorrect, guys. This is how it should work. You're going to say, let's say you know when all of your guides are hired, and you know that in 6 months, you need to be doing a review for, after 6 months after their hire date, there has to be a review. So you want to figure that out very quickly for your client. Well, it's pretty easy. You're just going to say select, and let's say last name, first name, hire date, and then come to the special part, because then we need to add 6 months to that hire date and create a new column. So we're going to say hire date, add date, and inside those parentheses, we're going to say hire date, comma, interval, 6, and then months. That should have given us a parenthesis. Let's see if I got it all over there. Yes. And then we're going to say as. And let's see, it says as first underscore review underscore date. And so then we're going to say from in the table name, which is guide. And this is what happens. 6 months. His first review date was 12/03, 2012. And then 9/04 and 7/08 and 5/04, 10/08. It added 6 months to every single one of these. Some of them bumping it up to the next year. This is a very, very easy way when you need to increase a date by a given number of months. Or you could even do it as a given number of years. Say we wanted to do intervals of 6 years. I could change that to year and run it again. And we see it pushed up to 2018, 2021. This is a very simple and easy way when you need to increase a date by a given number of months or days. You could even do days here. Say day. And we see we go from 6/3 to 6/9. So instead of having to go back in and edit a table to include this new column and typing out all the information for that new column, you could simply create it by using this add date. Based on this column, I just want you to add a certain number of days or months or years and create this new column. That's the simplest way to do it right there. And then, guys, you have to create some procedures. And I'm double checking here just to make sure that you have to execute those procedures. I'm pretty sure. Let's cancel. Let's see. Yes, you're actually going to run these procedures. So what if you wanted to create a procedure where you combine the first and last name columns into a single name column? That's the most common thing you will be doing with databases, is combining multiple columns into one single column. And then displaying that somewhere. Well, it's pretty easy to do in SQL. It's a very simple select, and you're going to use the concast keyword. And in parentheses, in this case, let's see, we're combining the first and last name. So I'd say first underscore name, comma. Now I'm going to add a space here. I'm going to show you what happens when you don't add a space. Let me just say last name. Like that. And we're going to do it in the name column as name. Plus I want to show the hire date. And just the hire date. Yeah, just the hire date. No, this is where we're combining everything we did. So we're going to do add date, hire underscore date, interval 6 months, like that. Oops. As first name. Oops. No. As first review date. Oops. As first underscore review date. And add some extra characters there. Oh. And from the guide table. Oh, it's still telling me I have a typo here. Let's see. Hire date, add date. Oh, right there. Comma. First name, last name, as name, hire date. Add date, name, yeah. Hire date. Got my comma. Comma. There we go. And run it. Uh-oh. Function. Colonial Adventures Concast does not exist. Yes, you do. That's wrong. There it is right there. Concast. It just didn't want to take it. Okay, so I'm just going to take all of this. Control X and Control V. If yours doesn't turn purple, guys, you may have to do it just like I did. I don't know why I didn't. Oh, it's concat. I put an S in there. Oops, that's a typo. Concat. Combining a category. Unknown column first. Oh, I misspelled first name. I sure did. First underscore name. There it goes. Now, you see what happened? There's no space in between the first and the last name. And that's not ever going to look very good. Easiest solution is you go after the comma after first name, hit your space bar, add a single quote, a space, a single quote, a comma, a space, and last name. Rerun it, and there it gives us that nice little space in between the first and last name. So it looks the way it's supposed to. And then it wants you to call a procedure. So how do you test a procedure? Well, back at the beginning of question 8, it asks you to make a procedure. And it gives you the code that you type. And I'm just going to redo that right here so we can create it before we call it. I'm going to say create procedure display guide. Select this. And go select last name, first name from guide, where guide underscore number equals guide underscore number. and run it, and you take a screenshot of that, where you get the bottom here where it shows your check mark, make sure you get that, the whole picture of the whole screen basically, because you want to get that check mark at the bottom showing it was done. And then later on, it's going to ask you to call that procedure. We're going to say call, and we're going to give it what database we want to call from. In this case, Colonial Adventures .bsp_guide, 2 parentheses, and run it. And it's going to give us the list of the guide name, first name and last names. That's simple. This is a procedure, is something that is stored within the database. So if you're using PHP to display data onto a website, the easiest way to create a procedure, because it's very easy to call that procedure using PHP. It's just a simple MySQL command that calls that procedure. So you don't have to type the actual SQL query out and all of that using PHP. You can just use that call function. And then it tells you to delete that procedure. Well, the delete is done the exact same way it is with a table or a view. It's in the exact, you just use drop. You want to say drop procedure and the procedure name. So I need to get rid of Colonial Adventures and just do display guide. And no parentheses. And hit run. Drop procedure. It was successful. Take a screenshot. Make sure you get your little check mark. And that, guys, is the end of chapter 8. This week's worksheets probably won't take you very long. It took me an hour to get through everything I showed you, and we skipped 2 questions, 3 maybe, because they were repeats of exactly what you had done right before. So I'm guessing that the assignment for chapter 4 is probably going to take you at most 2.5 hours. Probably not that long. But you need to make sure you give yourself plenty of time in case you get stuck and you need to email me with questions or whatever. And that is the end of our lecture today. Anyone still needing help, please, again, reach out to me, guys. I will make myself available for you. When you email me, let me know when you're available to meet with me, and I will make sure that I can meet with you at that time. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow to go over the assessment for week 4.